Thank you so much, Adam. It is such a pleasure to be here at ATT&CK Power Hour. Of course, I wish we were all in person. I will miss those panic attack cocktails from last year, but such a pleasure to be here with you today in this crazy year to share some knowledge. As Adam said, my name is Katie Nichols, and I'll be talking to you today about how my attack perspectives have changed this year. And kind of relevant to know that I used to be on the MITRE attack team. And so I'll be talking to you about how over this year, moving from the theory of being on the MITRE attack team to practice at Red Canary has changed my thinking a little bit. So hopefully I'll give you something new to think about today as well. Important things out of the way first. This is being recorded. The slides will be shared. I do not know when, but I'm confident that the MITRE team is going to get on it as quickly as they possibly can. So there you go. You don't have to ask that at all throughout the presentation. It is being recorded. There will be slides. Do not fear. All is well. A little bit about me. As I said, I'm Katie, and I'm the Director of Intelligence at Red Canary, which, if you're not familiar, we're known for managed detection and response. We also do cool projects like Atomic Red Team and Atomic Test Harnesses, which I'll talk about today. And I joined Red Canary in January 2020. So about a year ago. It's been an interesting change. Before that, I worked at MITRE on the attack team for several years. And as you can probably tell by the fact that I'm here, left on pretty good terms. So it's such a pleasure that I've been able to stay in touch with the team and be part of this attack community in a different way. I love threat intelligence. That's what I do day to day. I get to look at all the awesome data and information and try to track threats and use that information to inform decisions, which is what threat intelligence is. When I'm not working for Red Canary, I also teach for the SANS Institute, their cyber threat intelligence course. That's a lot of fun. And I don't always work and do threat intel things, I promise. When I'm not doing work things, I enjoy home organization. That is my newfound hobby from this year. I am a huge home edit fan. So for anyone else who likes the home edit, you might appreciate this photo of my beautiful breakfast shelf. My teas are organized in rainbow order, and I do not apologize for that. I also really like to work out. I work out on my back deck lately, and holiday lights make that a lot more fun. So pro tip, throw up some lights. Regardless of what holidays you celebrate, lights make these dark evenings better. That's a little bit of context about me. Again, kind of important to know that I used to be on the MITRE team. So my pleasure to come back again this year with a different hat on. Different perspectives can help you think differently. That's the theme of this talk. And you might be familiar with this image. You might have seen this one before. This is an image that can either be a young woman or an old woman, depending on your perspective. So the one that I see first is actually the young woman. So right here you see her eyelashes, her face, she's kind of turning to the side, like a feather from her hat or whatever, her hair. And so I see the young woman. But if you look at it a different way, from a different perspective, you can actually see an old woman, right? Here's her nose, and here's her hair, and maybe her eye, and something on her head. So is it a young woman or is it an old woman? Which is the right answer? Of course, there is no right answer. It's both at the same time. And the theme of this image and this presentation is really that you can have different perspectives on things. And it's good to change your thinking, to change your perspectives. And sometimes to change our perspectives, we need someone else. We need someone to point out that, hey, that would be the old lady's nose if you looked at it that way. Changing the situation we're in can help us change our thinking, which is not a bad thing. Maturing and changing how we think is a good thing. So today, this is ATT&CK. So I'll be talking to you about how my perspectives have changed over this past year on attack specifically, as I've gone from the theory of helping the team maintain the framework and speaking about it to putting it into practice in my role at Red Canary. I'll be chatting about 3 different areas where I've had quite a big change in perspectives. First off, tracking TTPs and how sometimes it's helpful to go beyond those 3 object types. Next one, detection coverage. How I thought about it before, how I've changed my thinking. And honestly, on this one, my thinking is going to continue to change. So I'll dive into that. And then last but not least, my thinking and my change in perspective on how we choose what to detect. So 3 different areas. Let's dive right in. First one, thinking through TTPs. The way that I'm used to tracking TTPs, and I was at MITRE, solid foundation for the MITRE attack framework. We got our tactics, high-level goals, our techniques and sub-techniques, how those goals are achieved, and then our procedures, the specific implementation. I know you all know attack, so I won't give you a full briefing. So this is the example technique and sub-techniques we'll be working through today as an example. Tactic, defense evasion, our technique, signed binary proxy execution, our sub-technique, MSHTA, which I like to say Mshta, take it or leave it. It's fewer syllables, much more efficient to say. That's our sub-technique, Mshta. This is a signed binary proxy or binary executable rather in Windows, as we can tell from that technique name. It's meant to execute legit things, Microsoft HTML applications, but of course, like a lot of these built-in executables, adversaries also like to use it to execute bad code. That's our technique and sub-technique for today. So we got our tactic, our technique and sub-technique of Mshta, and our procedure. For example, the open source framework Koadic can use Mshta to serve up additional payloads. So tactic, technique, procedure, and a side note, I love me some threat intel. So threat intel note for you, Koadic. If you're not familiar, go check out that framework. It's a post-exploitation open source framework, kind of like Empire, Metasploit, that kind of thing. But we've seen a few ransomware operators use that recently. So it's a good one to look at and make sure you can detect. So, okay, threat intel side note out of the way. So this is what I was used to at MITRE, adding to those group and software pages for years that the MITRE team has thankfully continued. Tactic, technique, and procedure. It's simple, it's elegant, it works as a standard. Then I got to Red Canary and started looking at our detections that look something like this. So this is an example detection for Koadic. All right, we got our tactic up here. That's nice and familiar. Defense evasion. We got our technique of Mshta right there, the technique ID. And then we have kind of the meat of the detection, right? You see the telemetry, task engine spawning Mshta. Then you have the exact command line here. And then this is what we call at Red Canary an annotation, right? The analyst explained, here's what's happening. The command's executing the VB script to launch Mshta, make an external network connection. So thinking through, okay, I got my tactic at the top, got that technique below it. And then I would kind of consider this annotation to be a procedure. So we'll call it a procedure, but then I was kind of faced with this challenge of there's this extra telemetry here, all right, this exact command line. What's that? We could say that that's part of the procedure, certainly is, but in this case, I think of the procedure maybe as a little higher level, and it might be useful for us to break out that specific command line. With that use case in mind, what my team decided to do is, all right, let's think beyond those TTPs. We got tactics, techniques, procedures. Let's add on a fourth level of observables. That's that exact telemetry, the exact command line. And for us, tracking that separately than the higher level procedure is really, really useful, as we'll talk about. So observables, we're adding on, and now we have 4 different levels of granularity. TTPs plus O. So TTPO, it rolls right off the tongue, right? Here's an example. I always like examples, helps you understand what I'm saying here. So we got our tactic. In this case, we're going to say that this applies under multiple tactics. We can do that. Tactic and technique and procedure. And then we just tack on our observable because that's important for us, for my team to track the exact telemetry that was used underneath that procedure. All right, not too bad. We got TTPO, 4 different levels now. My team, we're the intelligence team, so of course we track a bunch of different threats, groups, and malware. And so this year, and even prior to when I joined the team, they're working on how do we write up what we know about these threats in the form of profiles. And so as I joined the team, we were having some interesting discussions about how do we format these profiles? What structure do we use? Do we want to, write it like a blog post with prose? Do we want to have a table where we list out TTPs? How do we want to format these profiles? And As I so often say when I'm talking about threat intelligence, we tried to go back to our requirements. What were our needs? So checking out, this is the format that we kind of settled on for now, at least. At the top, we have our tactic. We found it was useful to kind of divide out by tactic so you can see what the adversary did for each of those high-level goals. You might notice that what's next is not a technique. And this is where I remember the Zoom call where we discussed this as a team, and I said, look, for my MITRE background, I'm used to being tactic and then technique and then procedure. And so I really think that's the way we should do it. Thank goodness my team kind of shifted my perspective and gave me a different way to think about it. And they said, Katie, well, I respect that. You have that background, but what if you think about not putting the technique under the tactic, but instead putting that procedure as the key object in our profile? And I was like, well, I don't really like that, but fine, I'm willing to compromise. Let's do it. And I'm really glad I did, because what we found over time as we started building out these profiles of different threats was it's actually really useful. When you have this procedure, right, this high-level procedure here, then we have the observable, or maybe multiple observables that apply to that procedure. We want to track that. Then under that, we have detectors, which is our term for detection analytics. What analytics might help us catch the adversary or the threat using that procedure? So we have 3 for this example. And we also note, are they targeted to this specific threat, or are they applicable more broadly? Kind of a good thing to track for us. So we have our observable, we have our detectors. Then we say, well, we want to track any additional tactics. You might have noticed we added primary tactic up here. So, okay, this procedure primarily falls under execution, but well, we know multiple tactics can apply at once. And so defense evasion, the adversary is also evading defenses as they do that execution. And then all the way down here, we add in our techniques, Mshta and Visual Basic. This is where kind of you can start to see the power of using the procedure as kind of our main object here, because if we were using technique as our main object, we'd have to divide this out and have Mshta as one technique, Visual Basic as another. But because we're applying these to the procedure and they both apply at the same time, it's kind of nice to not have to duplicate that information. Again, this format might not work for everyone, but this is an example of how I kind of altered my thinking, shifted my perspective when faced with a new challenge. And hey, we still have TTPs, but we thought a little bit beyond that to observables and this specific format we use for tracking threats. So I said, what this lets us do is meets our needs. We want to track that detailed telemetry. And so we can do that with observables. We can also do something really, really important, try to detect where we have detection coverage. For what observables or procedures for known threats can we detect those things? And where do we have gaps that we really need to fill? It's a beautiful marriage of threat intelligence and detection that just makes me really happy. At the same time, right, we added on that observables idea, we used our own format for profiles, but we're still using tactic, techniques, sub-techniques, and procedures. So we can still get the value of attack, communicating as a common language, but add on, because for our needs, it made sense to. So in summary, that's kind of our first key section. Shifted my perspectives on TTPs, changing that up, adding a little bit of extra goodness. Next key thing that I've changed my perspectives on, detection coverage. Just that concept of what does detection coverage mean? Throughout this year, it's been a fun journey, and I've had help from my friends, of course, thinking about what does that mean and how can we get more granular? So we'll dive into that in this section. As I left MITRE, this is what I thought. This is one of the ideas that I had that I still believe is a solid approach. This slide is from a presentation I gave with my friend Ryan Kovar at Black Hat, one of my favorite presentations, a lot of fun. And with a hat tip to our friend Olaf, we said a great way to describe detection coverage is using confidence levels, right? Maybe you use a single shade or multiple shades of blue. It's darker blue when you're more confident that you could detect that technique. It's lighter blue when you're less confident or you don't think you could detect that technique. We recommended this over the approach of maybe just calling, the technique green. We have it covered, because sometimes people think that green means done, and green doesn't really mean done. Green means maybe you're more confident, but it's not done. So we suggested, hey, use a single color, whatever your favorite color is. I'm going to use teal for the rest of the presentation because that's my favorite color, to express your confidence in your detection coverage. Another belief that I held when I left MITRE in January 2020 is that there are unlimited procedures. And I still believe this. It's still true. I wrote this blog post, my final blog post at MITRE, where I talked about being a savvy attack consumer, how you have to remember that any technique can have unlimited procedures by adversaries. I was thinking of techniques like masquerading. An adversary could masquerade as any software, any tool. They could give it any name. They could, there are almost infinite possibilities there, unlimited procedures that an adversary could use to implement a technique. I still believe that, but this idea that I had was sort of limiting my thinking. Unlimited procedures. It was limiting my thinking at least until I met my teammate Matt Graber. So February timeframe, we all headed out for our quarterly on-site in Colorado, Red Canary headquarters, and we were walking from the hotel to the office. It was a very snowy Colorado morning, very cold. And as Matt's and Katie's do, when they meet each other, they talk about attack and procedures and testing. So we were having a spirited conversation about attack and some of Matt's ideas for how you could test different techniques and procedures. And at some point I said something like, well, but you can't really test every procedure because there are unlimited procedures. And Matt, in a very kind, approachable way, as he does, said, well, are there unlimited procedures? Is it really unlimited? And is it unlimited for every technique? Because think of techniques like Mshta or RunDLL32, Rundle32 if you'd prefer. I don't actually say that, just Mshta. Think of techniques that are binaries. Maybe there are only so many flags or options, so many ways you could execute Mshta. And so maybe for some techniques and sub-techniques, we could do a better job scoping them than just saying they're unlimited procedures. And I was like, all right, Matt, that's a very interesting point. The first day, I wasn't sure if I kind of bought into it. Second day, I wasn't sure, but over weeks and months, I kind of started thinking about it and I was like, okay, maybe we can. So this is this concept that maybe we can break even sub-techniques into more granular parts. We have this challenge of how we define detection coverage. So let's dive into one option that I've changed my thinking to learn about, this idea of variations. When we left off, we had our TTPO, our tactics, techniques, procedures, and we had added in observables. After talking to Matt, I kind of changed up my thinking and added in a new level, this idea of variations. Now we think of a variation as an option that an adversary has based on those technical components of that technique or sub-technique. What options do they have that they might be limited to based on what we know about that technique or sub-technique? I should note that's a working definition. We've been talking about this ongoing the entire year, and I'm sure our thinking will change. So don't get mad later if that definition changes. But think of these as the options an adversary can choose from. 5 different levels of granularity now. TTVPO rolls right off the tongue. I'm sure that's going to catch on really quickly. Again, examples help. Here are 9 known variations of HTA. So our awesome research team, my teammates, dove into all of the things about Mshta and HTA and came up with, okay, what are the options available to an adversary based on the scope they found, which is just known things. This could always change. If Microsoft changes Mshta and how it works, it could change. But right now, here's what we know about the options available to an adversary. And we're defining these as variations. Lots more about this in a blog post that Matt just wrote this week. Check that out. Also check out atomic test harnesses, which are key to understanding this concept and why it matters so much to talk about these variations. All right, so variations, different options an adversary has within those techniques or sub-techniques. Let's do an example. When we left off, we had this TTPO thing. So all we've done in here is added in our variations. All right, within that Mshta sub-technique, An adversary can specify which protocol handler to use. That just makes that inline command execution possible. And they can also choose to, all right, let's do a direct download from a URI. Two different variations under Mshta that an adversary can choose. Okay, let's see if those variations can map to the stuff below it, our procedure and our observable. Specifying the protocol handler, well, yep, in this case, that's VB script, and that's there in our observable too. And then the next variation, direct download from a URI, well, that's going to be represented by the external network connection we mentioned in our procedure. And then there it is right there in our telemetry, in our observable. Sounds crazy, right? But maybe it's not so crazy because we felt like for us, it was useful to break things down past just our tactic, technique, and procedure levels, adding in variation and observable. And why this is so useful is because if you can figure out all the different variations, those options an adversary has available to them, you can start to mix and match them. Think of it like a Mr. Potato Head, which I know it's ridiculous. You know, you would never put Mr. Potato Head on an attack slide. Craziness, but stay with me on Mr. Potato Head. Maybe we say, you know, Mr. Potato Head's ears, those specific pink ears are the specific URI that an adversary used for direct download. All right, well, I want to make my Mr. Potato Head a little bit hipster. And so I'm going to add some hipster glasses to him. I'm going to specify my protocol handler with VB script. Maybe you decide he's a little too hipster, so let's ditch those glasses. Deal with it. Adversary chose a different variation. Now they have the deal with it glasses, and they're going to use JScript instead of VB script. It's kind of funny, right? I hope you enjoyed the deal with it glasses. I'm pretty proud of this slide. The point here is that an adversary can mix and match these different variations, just like a Mr. Potato Head. And so what we can do once we have these 9 scoped variations, mix and match them, see how many different Mr. Potato Heads we can create, and then make tests for those and run atomic tests for each of those variation combinations. Dive into that. So for example, if you use the atomic test harness that Matt and the team have created for Mshta, if you try all the different combinations available there, you're going to get 25 different tests. So what we can do is say, well, we really want to get to a granular level of detail on this sub-technique. And so let's try out 25 different tests using atomic test harnesses. And out of those 25, some of them we detected, some of them we didn't. So fill in with whatever color you like, right? 25 total tests. Teal means we got it. White means we didn't. So that is opportunity for improvement. This was helpful to us to have this more granular approach rather than just the high level, right? One technique, one color. That works sometimes for some use cases, right? Maybe you just want to talk more generally about that. But for us, it really helped us to get a little more granular. Thinking about another way to think about detection coverage. All about thinking here, changing those perspectives. You could track detection coverage more generally by, is the technique used by a certain adversary, right? But maybe you want to get a little more detailed with those observables. So we'll dive into how you can approach this from a threat perspective as well. Remember that profile breakdown I gave you? Right? We had the procedure as our key object, then we had observables, detectors, and techniques. Well, as we're thinking about our detection coverage for our sub-technique of the day, Mshta, maybe we combine and we say, okay, for every profile, every threat like Koadic or Fin7 that uses Mshta, let's grab that observable and see, could we detect that observable or not? If you pulled all that information together, you might get something like this. And so you can see we have 6 different threat observables for Mshta, right? We have 2 from Koadic, we have 2 from Fin7, we have 1 from Coveter, 1 from Lazarus. So for these 6 observables, maybe these are the threats that matter most to us. We can say, all right, Koadic observable 1, we can detect that, but there's another observable we've seen in the wild from other reporting that we can't detect. Right? Same thing moving along. And so when you break down beyond just that sub-technique level to these specific observables used by different threats, you can start to track what can we detect and not detect. Again, this is just a more granular approach than the higher level technique or sub-technique coverage. So I've talked to you about variations and how that can help us with detection coverage. I've talked to you about threat observables. What's the right way, Katie? What's the right way for us to explain detection coverage? If you know me, you can probably tell that I'm going to tell you there is no right way. It depends on what you're trying to approach. If you're trying to explain your coverage to leadership, this might work really well. Use your favorite color like teal or blue or orange for any weirdos, right? Explain to leadership at a high level. Darker means we're more or less confident in our coverage of these techniques. That is perfectly okay to do. Maybe they ask you, hey, why is that a signed binary proxy execution cell? Why is it that lovely shade of teal? Well, then you can zoom in and say, great question. Well, that's a parent technique. Turns out there are all these different binaries under that, including Mshta and run DLL32, which we have pretty good coverage on. But there are a lot of these other binaries that we don't cover so well. Having a more granular conversation if they ask, if you need to. We can even go deeper though, as we've talked about. Maybe someone wants to know, why is Mshta that lovely shade of teal? Well, from there, we have this high level Mshta sub-technique that we can break into our tests and our threat observables. So if you want to get even more specific, you want to have some data, something behind why you chose that shade of teal, use the results of the tests that you ran, maybe 25 of them. If there are more you can figure out, and then also bring in that threat intelligence component, of course, and think about, for the threats we care about, what observables have we seen from them in the past, and how well do we do to detect those? Dive as deep as you need to meet your need, right? For high-level leadership, it's going to be different than talking to your defenders in the weeds who are looking at telemetry. So both approaches are okay. Any approach to describe detection coverage, whatever works for you, go for it. Regardless of the approach you take, it's just hard to express coverage. Hopefully, I've given you some ideas, but there are limitations to whatever way you decide to express it. And there's no right or wrong way, but maybe there is a better or worse way. Maybe based on your needs, your requirements, you could find a more effective, more granular way that's going to help people understand what you're trying to get at when you say detection coverage. So as always, think about your needs and your requirements for detection coverage. And hopefully I've given you some ideas to help you change up your own perspective on coverage. This is something that means different things to different teams, and think a little deeper, change up your perspective. It might help you come to a deeper understanding of how detection coverage matters for your team. That brings us to our final section, the final area where my thinking has changed quite a bit, and this is on choosing what you detect. I understood this when I was at MITRE, but I understand it to a new level, that finding good detection opportunities is a huge challenge because not everything is necessarily useful to detect on. For example, this is an image from a blog post my team wrote on Bazaar backdoor and how it leads to Cobalt Strike and would eventually lead to Ryuk. The user opens up a PDF attachment and clicks a link. Those might not be great things to detect on. Maybe you have atomic indicators for a link, something like that. But in terms of behaviors, like clicking on links is probably not going to be a great detection opportunity. But good detection opportunities might include process hollowing or enumerating domain trusts, which we'll talk about. So something that I had to change my thinking on. I realized it was tough, but I didn't realize that most of the struggle of creating detection analytics, honestly, was in deciding which techniques should we even try to detect on. Something that I often said and I thought when I left MITRE was, well, discovery techniques as a whole tactic, they're not really that useful for detection. And this is a slide from my Black Hat presentation with Ryan, where we kind of made fun of a team and their struggles where they were like, well, let's detect on task list. Every time someone runs task list on a machine, let's detect on that. And of course, they get flooded with alerts because task list happens a lot. So that's just one example of an observable for a discovery technique. Admittedly, some discovery techniques are not that great for alerting. Things like task lists and IP config going to be pretty noisy in all environments. But I needed to change my perspective because I had kind of thrown out the baby with the bathwater, and I thought, well, discovery techniques, not that useful. Well, except when they actually are. This is where I had a new perspective, right? When I got to Red Canary and I started to see lots of different detections on, precursors to ransomware, for example, what we found was that some discovery techniques like domain trust discovery were actually useful for detection. So here are a few different examples of how adversaries have used nltest to do domain trust discovery. And for us, we found that this nltest detection analytics, these analytics we have are actually fairly useful to try to detect badness, more high fidelity than maybe some of those other discovery techniques. So this is a lesson I had to learn of, let's not throw out all discovery techniques from the tactic. Some of them might be more or less useful to detect on. And of course, as always, depends on your environment. I also learned that in addition to just choosing the detection analytics you want to write, which techniques to write them for, doing that testing and tuning is a ton of work. So came into Red Canary January 2020, super fresh and excited. And I was like, I have an idea for a detection analytic. This should never happen in an environment. So let's search for this command line or this behavior. And as many of you can probably tell, a lot of times that results in our kind detection engineers telling me, Katie, that really didn't work. We just got flooded with events. Okay, so over this year, I've started to learn a little bit more and say, okay, rather than just suggesting this analytic, let me suggest a hypothesis for what I think might be a good analytic. Then let's have like 5 or 6 backup plans, sometimes based on what adversaries have done. Ooh, that high level behavior isn't great for detection. How could we narrow that down a little bit more? This testing and tuning is a huge, huge challenge when you're trying to implement analytics. So remember that first hypothesis is just part of the battle. And don't get frustrated if you have noisy analytics. Think about, is it always this same username or command line or host? Could you tune it out and suppress it? Or could you narrow things down based on what adversaries are doing? That's where threat intelligence is a beautiful addition. As we wrap up, a couple takeaways that I want to leave you with. The overall idea here is that it's good to change your perspectives. It's good to change your thinking. And sometimes you don't need a job change to do that. Maybe you just need to get on a different team or different project or work on something new or hire a new person who challenges your status quo thinking. For attacks specifically, maybe some of the ideas that I shared are useful, but maybe for you, you think a little more deeply about TTPs and you expand beyond that to meet your needs. Maybe you think a little differently about detection coverage, some of the ideas I've given you, or how you can define detection coverage for your team based on your needs and your requirements. And of course, that challenge of figuring out what do we even detect on, ultimately, a lot of experience, trial and error, and learning and teamwork are going to help you figure out good detection opportunities. But changing your perspectives and listening to your teammates who've done this sometimes can be helpful. In closing, it is a good thing to change up your perspective. Surround yourself with people who think differently. Diversity is the spice of life. And with that, I think I'm probably running short on time. So cheers to everyone. Thank you so much for having me.